Hello there, music lovers, and thanks so much for stopping by the channel to check out this video. I'm going to be talking about Phil Collins and his Not Dead Yet tour, which continues into 2019. Last year, I did a video about Phil when I heard that he was going to be doing some U.S. shows, and I talked about how, what's it going to be like, because I was looking at the footage of some shows that he had been doing in Europe. He wasn't playing drums, wasn't even able to stand up for the whole show. Was wondering, who was going to go see him? Was it going to be a good show? Last year in October, he did a 15-date U.S. tour. And I know that he did very, very well with those shows. He sold out all 7 East Coast dates. And I'm not talking about playing like theaters or small clubs. He's filling arenas. So people still love Phil. They still want to go see him, and the reviews have been really, really good. So I wanted to take a look at the set list, take a look at the show that he's putting on. He just is getting ready to wrap up some shows down under, and then he's going to be hitting Europe in June. He's going to be going to Sweden and Italy and Germany and France and all that. So Phil is no stranger to the odds. He has constantly beaten the odds throughout his entire career. And I think the last 10 or so years has probably been the worst of his life. The biggest obstacles that he's had to overcome. In the earlier part of his career, he had to, probably get over more professional odds. Taking over being the lead singer of the band Genesis, when Peter Gabriel left. That was a big thing. Going solo, juggling a solo career with being in Genesis. Both extremely successful. He did both of those. But then 2008 came, and he did this reunion tour with Genesis. He hadn't played drums for quite a while, screwed up his back, screwed up his neck. He went for surgery to repair some dislocated vertebrae, wound up giving him nerve damage to the point where he couldn't hold drumsticks very, very well. His feet also, he's got problems with his feet, so he can't stand for very, very long. He also went through his 3rd divorce, which really, really hit him hard. He had kids involved. His wife wound up leaving Europe, moved to the States. So he was really missing his family. He wound up becoming an alcoholic, which is something he was never, ever known for. All the stuff that he went through previously never drove him to drink. And it, found him in the hospital, near death. And Phil overcame that, moved to the States. He's now closer to his family. His kids are now older. His son, Nick, is 17 years old. He plays drums with him now. And his kids really have inspired him to press on and to get out and play. So these days, Phil's going out with a 14-piece band. He's got 4 backup singers and a 4-piece horn section, along with 2 drummers, one of them being his son, Nicholas, along with a percussion player. And of course, he's got Leland Sklar on bass, otherwise known as Gandalf. You may have seen him in The Lord of the Rings. I've always been fascinated by that guy. It was like, is he the guy in the Oak Ridge Boys? No. He just, he kind of reminds me of some kind of wizard from another time. But Leland kicks ass. He's been with Phil throughout his entire solo career, as well as Daryl Sturmer. Now, I mean, Daryl's been playing with Phil ever since Steve Hackett left Genesis. He's the one that took over Steve's spot, and he's been the touring guitarist for Genesis ever since, I think it was 1978. And whenever Phil has done any solo shows, Daryl's been his right-hand man. And so it's good to have him back out there playing once again, because ever since Genesis kind of went into limbo, we haven't seen much of Daryl. So he's got a really good band with him. And, the whole show starts with Phil walking on stage by himself. You don't see the band yet. Phil walks on stage with his cane. He sits down in a swivel chair, and he starts to talk to the audience. And he tells them about how his foot is fucked and how he can't stand up. He's going to be sitting down. And then, you know, he was like, yeah, I was going to give this all up. But then he says, the reason why I'm back is because I missed you. Which, of course, you know, the audience just loves to hear that. And Phil is just, you know, very, very charming. He charms the audience. And so right away, Phil kind of takes the elephant out of the room. I mean, you're going to go see this guy who is known for playing the drums, known for being a dynamic frontman and running around. And you know that you're not going to get that. But he diffuses that whole bomb, all the awkwardness. He sucks it right out of the room, addresses it right up front, and he tells everybody we're going to have a really good show. And then he immediately goes right into Against All Odds, just singing it there from his chair. And you know, that's the perfect way to start the show. I've heard some people say, how come he doesn't start the show with a bang and go out there with the band blazing? But when you understand what I just told you about how he handled talking to the audience and charming them, getting rid of the elephant in the room, it's a brilliant way to start, especially with Against All Odds, which I think is one of the best songs that he's ever written. I think it's one of the best ballads that's ever been written, actually. It's a great, great song from the beginning piano, the verses, the chorus, everything about it. It really sucks you in. It's just an amazingly beautiful song filled with melodies and undeniable hooks. It's the perfect pop song, the perfect ballad, I should say, and the perfect way to start the show. And I should also mention that Against All Odds is one of 7 #1 hits that he had. You know, I've talked about all this stuff that Phil's done, but he's hit the top of the charts 7 times. And so he comes back with his second song of the evening, Another Day in Paradise. That was another #1 hit. And then the band, you know, the band is getting revved up. Then they go into I Missed Again, which is a great track from his debut solo album, Face Value. Then they go into Hangin' Long Enough, which has a lot of horns blazing. And then he takes it down a notch, goes into a couple of Genesis songs, Throwing It All Away, and then Follow You, Follow Me. And also he does Can't Turn Back the Years, which is one of his, you know, softer solo tunes, was never really crazy about it. But then he added Inside Out to his set list. He didn't do this in the States, but he did add it for the shows down under in Australia and New Zealand. Inside Out is one of my favorite Phil Collins solo tunes. It sounds to me like it could have been a Genesis song, maybe if you pulled the horns out, but I always did love that song. Who Said I Would comes next. That's another tune from the No Jacket album. And then he goes into another #1 hit, a song that I was never really crazy about. It was a duet with Marilyn Martin called Separate Lives, which you may recall. Marilyn, from what I understand, is currently a backing singer for Fleetwood Mac. You might want to check me on that, but I believe that she got the call to hit the road with Fleetwood Mac for their current tour. Then he goes into You'll Be In My Heart, which was another major song for Phil Collins. This is a song that he did for the Tarzan movie, this big Disney film. It won him like a Golden Globe Award, a couple of major awards. He wound up getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And that was another odd that he beat. You know, was leaving this band Genesis that he had sold millions of albums with, had a lot of success with, walked away from it and continued to have major solo success. And after that, we get to the drum trio part of the show. It's called a trio because at one point you've actually got Phil joining his son and the other percussion player. Now, Phil can't play drums, as I said earlier, but he can use his hands, and he plays like these percussive pads. And so he was able to join in for that part of the show. But Phil's son, Nick, from what I've seen, has done a tremendous job. You know, I know that Phil has talked about how Nick has got the aggression and that youthful energy that Phil used to have, and he welcomes it to his shows. And then after the drum trio, the band launches into Something Happened on the Way to Heaven, which is from the But Seriously album. That was a big hit for Phil. Lots of horns going in this one. And then after that, they slow things down. Just Phil and his son Nick on stage, Nick behind the piano. And they do a song called You Know What I Mean, which was this nice little simple ballad from Phil's first solo album, Face Value. And this is a song that Nick actually picked out. And it's a nice little quiet moment between Phil and his son. You know, it was a nice father-son moment. And then after the song is finished, you know, Nick gets up, gives his dad a hug, and goes off stage. And then up next, we get Phil doing his signature song, In the Air Tonight. I mean, there's so much that's been said about this great, great song. It's classic Phil Collins. And I even did a video about this song, about how he got the drum sound working with Peter Gabriel, that gated drum sound that pretty much, you know, was the sound that Phil used throughout the rest of his career and defined his drum sound, not only as a solo artist, but in Genesis too. I'll put a link up to that video. But I remember when I was growing up, In the Air Tonight was a very misunderstood song. You know, everybody was trying to figure out, what is this song about? You know, people even thought that it was a song that Phil wrote after seeing someone drowning. You know, but really, when you think about when the song was written, you know, as I've talked about, this came from his very first solo album. A lot of the songs from that album were driven and inspired by his divorce. And so this song, when you look at the lyrics, there's a lot of anger and despair and frustration. And when you take a look at somebody drowning and, you know, would you give them a hand? You can definitely see how it would tie into, you know, his whole marriage dissolving. You know, it kind of makes sense when you look at it from that context. And I'm not sure, you know, when I was growing up, that I don't know that I even, first of all, knew that he was going through a divorce. So I would have never tried to connect them. But now when you look back on it, it's very easy to see how what he was going through definitely influenced what he was writing. And that's something that would always be the case when it came to Phil. After that, we get into the home stretch of the show. Phil pulls out more of his upbeat stuff to kind of close out the show with You Can't Hurry Love, of course, the Motown cover that he did from Hello, I Must Be Going, his second solo album. And then he does Dance Into the Light. I was never a fan of that album or that song. That was more of his Latin-infused sound. And then he pulls out Invisible Touch from Genesis, Easy Lover, which was his duet with Philip Bailey back in the 80s. Phil did a lot of work with a lot of other artists, and I did a whole video about that. There was a whole box set that just came out recently called Plays Well with Others. I'll put a link up to that video where I talk about a lot of the projects that Phil has done outside of his own solo career and outside of Genesis. And he produced Philip Bailey's album, the Chinese Wall album. Of course, Phil Bailey is in Earth, Wind, and Fire. And for this show, Phil is joined by Arnold and Amy, and they, you know, sing with him and, you know, interact with him. And then after this, we get to Susudio, which was another #1 hit for Phil. And then he comes back with the encore, Take Me Home, from the No Jacket Required album. That closes out the show. So overall, it's a night full of hits, a lot of fun, father-son moments. And, you know, you can say what you want about Phil not being able to play drums, not being able to run around or even stand up. But I think the success of these shows speaks for itself. And, you know, if Phil wasn't so goddamn charming, I don't think he would have anybody interested at this point. But the fact is that people love Phil Collins. The fans still love him. And they're not ready to throw it all away just yet. If they could spend one more night with Phil doing what he does best, which is entertaining an audience. And he's proven that he can do that just from sitting in a chair. So look for Phil to, like I said, in June, plays more dates in Europe. And I am guessing, and I've also heard, saw this in an interview with Daryl Sturmer, talked about how, you know, the whole thing in the U.S. went well back in October, that more than likely Phil will be back in the States sometime soon. Also, be sure to check out my video companion playlist for the Not Dead Yet tour that I put together. I basically have compiled a bunch of live clips from this tour, put them in running order so you can check out the show as if you were there. You can see if maybe it's something that you want to go see. I know for myself, I probably wouldn't go see this show since it's in arenas. I think this type of show for me works better in a theater, a smaller environment. You know, more intimate show, I would go see. I'm not really into arena shows unless it's, you know, it's got to be a band with all cylinders firing and a real exciting kind of show. Otherwise, I'm more into the amphitheaters and clubs and smaller venues where you can get real up close and it's more of an intimate kind of thing. That's just where I'm at personally. But I want to know what you think. What do you think about this show? What do you think about Phil in 2019? Would you go see this tour? Are you planning on it? You hope he comes to the States. Would you go see him in Genesis? There's been talk about him maybe getting back with Genesis and doing some live shows with his son on drums. I know fans are divided about that. Let me know in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Be sure to hit that subscribe button too. And I'll be back with more videos soon. All right, so take care.